Hello, everyone. This is Greg Drevenstedt, editor-in-chief at Rider Magazine, and your host for the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast. Our guest today is Peter Jones. Peter writes the Moto Life column in Rider Magazine, and he recently published a book called The Bad Editor, Collected Columns and Untold Tales of Bad Behavior. Peter has written for every major motorcycle magazine over the years, and he's worked for companies like Öhlins, Nitron, and Pirelli. He's a former race team owner, and he set a 202.247 mile per hour land speed record on a production-based, normally aspirated motorcycle at Maxton Air Force Base. Peter, welcome to the show.
Hi, how you doing?
Yeah, that means now. You're on the show now.
I was waiting for an actual introduction, not like, hey, welcome.
No, I did. I always do my intro before the call because if I screw up the intro, it always starts off the interview poorly. So I figured I would record it before you got on the line, and then we could just go off to the races. So here we are. We're not live. We are recording, but you're in New York. I'm in California. So I see that you have a cup of coffee, and so do I. So we're well caffeinated. Well,
that's the confusion. I'm drinking decaf.
Oh, shouldn't have said that. You don't have to admit to that. So, as I said in the intro before you got on the recording, you write the Moto Life column for Rider. You started in the January. No, what issue did you start in? March?
February. No, March, April, May. Yeah, March.
Right. So I took over as editor-in-chief in the January issue. And then in the March issue, you started writing the Moto Life column. And I know you've had columns in many magazines over the years, Cycle World, others. So you've been in the industry for a while. Give us a little bit of your backstory.
Well, I'm sort of an accidental journalist because I was sort of minding my own business working as a museum director in upstate New York at just a regional history museum, but it also had the laboratory in the backyard where sound film was invented. And that had been kept a secret. So I was doing lots of restoration projects and trying to bring that laboratory out to the public to learn about, because it's a huge international bit of history that's been lost. And at the same time, I was road racing motorcycles. In my mid-30s, I first went road racing, wanted to do endurance races. And my board of directors who I worked for thought the racing stuff was a little crazy, but the guy works like a maniac, so let's just let him go, And then I realized racing that I'd had some thoughts I'd never read about, and so I wrote a story about panic, what panic is, why we panic, how to avoid panic, pointing out that road racers don't panic, And basically panic is not having the answer to the question you're asking when things go bad. And road racers always have the answer. And as you probably know, they're always, no matter how bad it is, they're like, oh, I got this. I can save it.
Well, I've never been a road racer, but I didn't think I had the nerves for it. It's the focus and the ability to basically compartmentalize your fear. Like I said, deal with panic. I've had plenty of oh shit moments on the road and even on racetracks at press launches. So it takes a certain level of discipline or a personality to be able to handle that pressure in those moments.
Yeah, you over time, especially racing, you learn. Road racing is all about anticipation. You are looking as far down the road as you can look and anticipating what's going to happen next. If you're looking at where you are now, forget it. And so that was the first thing I wrote, the first thing I got published. I sent it to one magazine, and they rejected it, and I sent it to a second magazine, and they printed it, and that was it.
What magazine, and when was that?
I sent it to Cycle World, who rejected it. I had to go right to the top, and then I sent it to Motorcyclist. Don't tell them they were second best, okay? And they printed it. It was when Nick Einach was still there, and he's who I dealt with through the whole thing. And so there you go. I was like, wow. And then never rejected again, which is pretty cool. And then immediately Einach went and started Sport Rider magazine, where my second contribution and third contribution were printed. So, and then to make this way too long already story short, I took another job at a boutique, a distributor of a boutique brand of motorcycles, and that didn't work out after 5 months. And I found myself in upstate New York in the cold in the winter without a job. And then I heard that Sport Rider was looking for an associate editor. And I'm like, take me to the promised land.
Great. So that's what, late 90s probably?
1997.
Yeah. Okay. I remember those early days. That was actually about when I started to get into riding. I started in my mid-20s. I was in graduate school in Pennsylvania and looking for an escape from the grind. And I somehow thought motorcycles would be the answer. And I guess it was. So,
well, the wonderful discovery of becoming a moto journalist, and don't tell anybody, it's not a job, it's a lifestyle. And so I've seen much of the world because of motorcycles now. I've been on racetracks like you, in foreign countries. And motorcycling has been good to me, even though it's really risky, but that's part of what I love about it. And so I've taken huge risks. And, at Bonneville, trying to set a land speed record over 200 miles an hour, the bike I was on, the engine blew at about 198 miles an hour.
ooh.
And, but I had my fingers on the clutch lever. So I pulled it in immediately. And then after coasting for a few hundred yards, I'm thinking, well, what if I let the clutch out? Maybe the engine's okay now. And I realized, no, don't do that. And it had blown out the front engine mount, when the rod came out of the engine.
But no injuries. You coasted to a stop. You didn't come off the bike.
Coasted forever.
Nothing to run into.
You don't want to use brakes much at Bonneville.
No. You're on salt.
Like, yeah, it looks and feels like the frosting on a wedding cake. And that's about how much traction it gives you. So that's why they give you a mile before you even get to the timing lights. Because if you try to launch hard, you're not going anywhere. You're just
going to spin. Yeah.
So, but the weird thing at Bonneville about oiling your rear tire, rather than it causing a lack of traction, it increases your traction because the hot oil melts the salt crystals onto the tire.
Huh.
So you end up with this crusted tire, which, probably, I didn't have any engine to accelerate from, but it certainly didn't have any less traction.
I went to the Bonneville Speed Trials in 2008, and that was an impressive experience. Like it's everybody set up, in these pop-up tents and trailers and so forth, and you can't really see the run because it's so far away, but it's a pretty cool experience just to know how fast they're going. And if you've got binoculars, you can really see what's going on out there. But I've never run on the salt, and it doesn't really sound like something I would aspire to do. Though I do understand some people, once you've done it, you get that there can be that salt addiction. People just want to go back and try a little bit harder, go a little bit faster, do it, set a record in an obscure class, whatever it might be.
Well, for me, you got to be shooting for over 200, and so the people who go 300 or 400, especially on motorcycles, I'm like, wow, 200 slow. But at 200, it's actually, it's a violent experience, I'd have to say. And it is addictive. It is, I desperately wanted to go back. And my adventure at Bonneville was way more adventurous than it was supposed to be. The day before the engine blew, I got caught in a crosswind, an 18-mile-an-hour crosswind. And I didn't realize it. I thought the fairing had come loose or something because I'm pulling on the handlebars to get the bike to stand up straight. When you get caught in a crosswind on a motorcycle, the motorcycle leans into it. And everything's cool. When you're at Bonneville on the salt, you have such little traction, the wind actually blows the motorcycle over. And so I was, I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. I'm trying to get the motorcycle to stand back up again. And the RPMs were going up and down, so I knew I was losing traction, but I had really good numbers. And I'm like, I might have the record. So I didn't let off the throttle, which might not be a good idea, but I survived it. And the best part of Bonneville, and I've been confirmed this by someone who's been to Bonneville over and over and over. Doug Myers used to go there on a Kawasaki, always on a Kawasaki, trying to break the record. And when I said to him, what's the best part of Bonneville? He said, yeah, after the run. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. Because you go through such violence for, it's 5 miles. So what's that, like 2.5 minutes, 2 minutes? And then when you get to the end, as you were speaking of, there's nobody there. You're all alone on this salt bed under a blue sky with no horizon between them. It's so weird. And everything is quiet and it's just you. And you went from such intensity to that. It's beautiful. It's just beautiful.
Well, I'm also there. I imagine, with riding, with risk, with anything, it's like that is part of the exhilaration. There's some fear mixed in with it. There's a lot of, adrenaline. But then once you come through it, there's also that sense of relief. So I'm sure that it's like, hey, I did it, but I also made it through to the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the project I set down like 10 years ago, I was writing a book about risk and why people like motorcycle road racers risk their lives essentially just for fun and sport, because it fascinated me. When I was a kid is when Nicky Lauda had his terrible crash and his ear was burned off. He was so badly scarred in a Formula One car. And 4 weeks later, he's back in a car racing again. I'm like, what is wrong with this guy? Yeah. So really, when I went road racing, I was trying to answer that question. While other racers are making notes of, where to turn in, where to brake, and so on, I'm writing about how I feel emotionally and mentally and with what I'm dealing with, which wasn't a good plan for someone trying to race.
So at Bonneville, you didn't hit the 200-mile mark, or did you?
No, I failed. 199.8, I think it was. And it's funny, I was telling these guys about it, back home, and they're like, wow, Jones went 200 miles an hour at Bonneville. And I'm like, no.
You can't round up.
Don't round up at Bonneville. 199.8. They're like, no, it's 200. I'm like, no.
No, not how it works. But so I said in the intro, you set a 202.247 mile per hour land speed record at Maxton Air Force Base. That's not on the salt. That's on what? It's on a runway?
Yeah, that's on a runway, and it's a different show because you don't have 5 miles available. You don't have 5 miles available anywhere on the East Coast. You got to get to a desert for that. So it's about 2 miles, and you, from a dead start, it's 1 mile to the timing lights, and it's the speed you're going when you cross through the timing lights.
Okay.
Whereas at Bonneville, it's the speed you go for a mile, and it's four different times. Yeah.
And what is it averaged over those several different measurements? Is that how it works?
No, you have 4 different
opportunities.
Results.
I see.
So for each mile, you have a result.
I see. Gotcha.
And the first mile of the 5 is just your acceleration mile, and so it's not timed. And so at Maxton, the thing about it's an old airport, and they poured sand in the cracks to make it smoother. But there's a kink, like 200 yards after the start, and so you got some speed building already, and it's like I'm going through a kink where someone poured sand in the cracks. I'm like, what? And then you got a mile to stop, and turn around, which is plenty of room because you're on pavement.
Right.
And it's really bumpy, and that's where I went 202.247. And the cool thing about that event was before I did that, I went 200 point something. And then I came back and stopped at the timing lights where my crew chief was. And he said, well, you went 200. And I'm like, oh, it's not clean. It's not over. It's not like 201. And he goes, well, you think you got it in you to do it again? I'm like, yeah, I made some mistakes. Let's do it again. So we did it again, and I nailed the 202. And what I didn't know, but he did, is that if you do a run, it erases the run before, unless you go through tech. So I could have thrown it all away right there. But he believed in me. And so here's the thing. I didn't get to what's the interesting thing. I knew I was going faster. I felt it in every way. I heard it. And that's weird because, you know, if I'm on a bike going 150 or 175, I can't tell the difference. So between 200 and 202, it was a totally different experience.
Wow.
I'm like, wow, that's crazy. It's like everything was different.
So at Maxton, at Bonneville, to have your time be official, you have to run it both directions, right? And it's the average of the two. At Maxton, was it just a one-shot deal and it would be certified?
Yeah, it's a one-shot deal and they certify it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, with the ECTA, you know, and as you know, at Bonneville, it's the SCTA. And yeah, you have to run in both directions to make sure you didn't earn it with the tailwind. And I think it's the average of the two, but I'm not going to say that with certainty. I don't know that they both have to be at the threshold you need, but the average.
Right. Okay. That's my understanding. I don't keep up with it a lot, but I did know you had to run both directions. And so that can be part of the challenge. So you and I, we met, or like I said, I started working at Ryder in 2008. And one of the, is that you have this book about untold tales of bad behavior. And so I know that my first press launch, you weren't at my first press launch, but that was one where it was the sort of an eye-opening experience. I could get into that later. But one of the things that I mentioned in a column is that one of my best memories of going on a press launch with you is when you worked for Pirelli and you hosted the Angel ST launch in Asheville, North Carolina. It's a beautiful place to ride. We got rained on, of course, but you took us to Hendersonville, and you were living in North Carolina at the time. Is that true?
Yeah, I moved to North Carolina into the mountains. And is that the first time we were at an intro together where I had gone to the dark side and was doing the marketing rather than being a journalist?
It might be, but what I enjoyed is the stop at the cemetery where Billy Leon and Benny Lloyd McCrary were buried, the world's heaviest twins. Because as a kid, you know, I used to look at the Guinness Book of World Records all the time. And it's like seared in my mind, a memory of that photo of them they're on the two little Hondas. They've got their matching outfits with their cowboy hats and their plaid pants and their shirts, and they're each over 700 pounds. And I've seen that in so many copies of the Guinness Book. And you took us to their grave. They're buried next to each other in Henderson, North Carolina. So I thought that was a very cool little, I don't know, bit of bizarre trivia to go see that in person.
Yeah, I always like to add something to an intro that's a surprise. And another intro I did up there, I went into a coffee shop and there were little paintings, like 3x6. And the painting was either of a little baby chicken or of a skull. And there were like 100 of them. And they're all for sale. They're all framed and they're all for sale. So I got a hold of the artist and I said, hey, can you paint me a picture of a scooter? And then when I was working at Kimco, we stopped at the coffee shop and I didn't know where it was, but I told him just hang it somewhere on the wall and we'll discover it when we're there. Nobody noticed it.
A little too clever for your own good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your book. You just published a book. I know it's available on Amazon. We'll have links to everything in the show notes. It is called The Bad Editor, Collected Columns and Untold Tales of Bad Behavior. So tell us about your book.
Yeah, I started putting together a collection of my columns, you know, because as you know, motorcycle journalism is a dying profession. except for you and me.
I was about to say, man, don't write the epitaph just yet.
No, the Renaissance. We are part of the Renaissance. It's going to be great. Um, so I thought, well, what can I do? And I've always owned all of my columns, even though I've written for all different publications. That's the one thing I've owned. What I wrote on assignment, the magazine notes. So I started putting a collection together, and then I remembered that, over the years I've been keeping a running list of incidents of bad behavior in the motorcycle industry. So I told a friend that after I do this book, I'm going to do a book about bad behavior. Actually, the friend was Melissa Pearson. And her being smarter than me, she said, let me get this straight. You're going to do a book that people may or may not want. And then later you're going to do a book that people will want. Does that make sense? And I'm like, yeah, never mind. So that's why this contains both of those. And it's only, there's 30 of the collected stories and there's 19 of the stories of bad behavior. And I wanted to release this a year ago. But as I mentioned to you otherwise, that other place that it had too much anger in it. And I'm like, no, I want this to be fun. So a lot of things happened in my life and I had to put it down for a couple of years. And then I came back, I rewrote it. I got rid of all the anger. I got rid of, there were a couple places where I talked about great things I did. I'm like, no, this is bad behavior. Get rid of that. So it's all, I really threw myself under the bus. And if it's popular, I got more.
Right on. Well, I know this is the point where the podcast host is supposed to say, oh, I read your book and I really enjoyed it, but I haven't seen it yet. I know the print copies, I'll get one at some point. So maybe I'll have you back on the show once I've read it and I'll pick it apart or I'll ask you questions about specific tales of bad behavior. But I do know that, like I said, the way that you said that you pulled all of the anger out of it is that, and you threw yourself under the bus. To me, the most entertaining writing is always when the writer has fun, like basically pokes fun at themselves. When things work out great or you toot your own horn or puff out your own chest, most people don't enjoy that kind of reading. It's like we want to read about things not working out, people's lives falling apart. And so, misery loves company sort of thing. So is that sort of how you put yourself out there?
Well, that's pretty much been through my writing through my whole career. And I've done so many stupid things and so many bad things. I got a lot of material. So, and you're right. Self-effacing is, it's great to read, about, and so, yeah, and also I don't mind like my copy editor on a number of the stories, she'd write too much sharing. And I'm like, no, that's what I do.
Right.
And, it also, I think it comes out of partly when I was a kid watching kids get picked on for something stupid they did. And so I realized, if I shared the stupid things I do.
Told you, turn your ringer off, man.
I did. And I turned off the connection between the two.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to put my phone in water in the sink. Where was I? Oh yeah. I realized that it disarms people, and if you tell everyone how stupid you are, they're like, oh, geez, how can I mock that guy? He's way ahead of me on it, and so it takes away the weapon from people, and then the other kids who can't help themselves. From doing stupid stuff. It makes them feel better. It makes them feel less lonely. I realized in 5th grade, whereas when I began my screwing, no, I began much earlier. Anyway, I realized by 5th grade that no matter how badly I would mess up, there was always some poor schmuck who'd mess up worse.
Sure.
And save me, but I always felt bad. I'm like, thanks for taking one for me, but that's sad. That's just sad. Yeah. But anyway, I've had problems with life. I failed 7th grade, and in 2nd grade, they sent me to an ear doctor because I would never hear when the teacher called on me. because I was practicing my daydreaming skills, which by 6th grade I had totally mastered. I couldn't wait to go to class so I could just sit there and daydream all day. And I should have failed 6th grade, but the teacher liked me because he liked my older sister, who was like your perfect student, you know. And I got that my whole life through school. Oh, you're nothing like your sister. Like, no, I'm not, you know. And then I dropped out of high school. But when I dropped out of high school, I like I don't know, it was like February or March. I told my parents, I go, look, I'm gonna drop out of high school, get an equivalency diploma, go to a community college and get grades and transfer to university. It's exactly what I did. You know, I didn't drop out because I was bored to death. It was killing me, you know. Plus, I needed more time to do drugs.
So, with like Anthony Bourdain's famous book, Kitchen Confidential, I think that people love that book is we all eat at restaurants and everybody wanted to know what happens in the kitchen because a lot of people have never worked in a restaurant kitchen. And so he tells this grand tale of, you know, basically like marauding pirates, essentially, you know, tattooed bad boys. So I know for motorcycle enthusiasts, a lot of times people are like, what happens at motorcycle press launches? You know, we read what you put in your magazine, we see the road tests and so forth, but that's been edited. That's been sort of, you know, that's you're trying to say focus on the actual motorcycle. So it's the behind the scenes tales that I think people are curious about. And I know I have a few of my own tales, but is that sort of what these untold tales of bad behavior? It's not just, you know, it's motorcycle industry related. It's doing things.
Well, I did it. I wrote about both sides of it, okay? Because what people ask me the most of is what goes on at those intros. You know, do they pay you to go? Who buys everything? They really they aren't asking me, you know, are you guys a bunch of, you know, crazy ass drunks? They're asking how the industry works, okay? And I go through step by step what the anatomy of a motorcycle intro and what the relationship is with the brands and the gifts, the graft, the travel, and most brands. It's a very strange relationship because the advertisers are the brands that you're evaluating, and so it's a conflict of interest. It's a total conflict of interest. What are you going to do? And when I got in the industry and I was sat down by my editor and being told what goes on in an intro, I was shocked and disappointed. And my father was like a very, very, very moral person. If he found $20 in a parking lot, he'd ask the first person he came to if they lost $20. You know, he shouldn't have been that specific, but that was it. But anyway, I had to figure it out, you know, and realize I'm not going to change this industry. This is what it is, you know. But I'm going to take notes. But you know, and then one of the stories is when I found out where the line between harmless graft and getting a check for $500 is, you know, and I sent the check back.
Nobody ever sent me a check. I know that's the thing is I've read in so many motorcycle magazines, especially when it's the results of a comparison test, or like, you must be, you know, on Honda's payroll or something. And like, trust me, like nobody's getting rich doing this. Nobody's on anybody's payroll. It's not like being part of the mob, you know. But, you know, there are at press launches, you typically stay at a nice hotel. There's going to be nice meals. You know, the drinks are typically paid for. Though those people that I know that review both motorcycles and cars, they often say, oh man, if you've never been to a car launch, motorcycle launches are for paupers. I mean, they're basically, that's what the proletariat do. You know, car launches on a totally different level because the automotive industry is so much bigger. So
yeah, cars is you're royalty.
Yeah.
If you're a motojournalist in the car world. It makes what goes on in motorcycling look like absolutely entirely harmless. But to continue answering that question, I also wrote about how most manufacturers are really well behaved in this relationship. They have to do what everyone in the industry does. Otherwise, the journalists are like, where's my gift? Did you get a gift? I didn't get a gift. And so, but there was one manufacturer, I think things have changed now. And I don't name names or brands, because this isn't out of spite, it's out of fun. But there was one brand that just rode you, and worked you over. If you at an intro said anything critical about the machine, well, then they had to, start arguing with you about, how you're wrong. And so that was a bit rough. But then to get to what you brought out, I also write about all the bad things as journalists that we do at intros. And some of it, like with that one manufacturer who pushed too hard, a lot of my bad behavior was directed at them. It was my way of pushing back, which really was a bad business decision on my part because it might have led to getting blacklisted.
I've heard that some people, yeah, exactly, have to read the book. So, I mean, that's the thing about, I've said this to other people I know, like, when you say, oh man, I'm really sick of going to Spain or something like that, everybody's like, oh, how can you complain about something like that? And one of the things that in terms of the logistics of a press launch that most people don't understand, when you say, oh, I went to Spain 6 times last year, and they're like, oh wow, that sounds like a jet set lifestyle. It's like, no, I flew 24 hours to get there. I was on the ground for 36 hours and I flew another 24 hours to get home. So I had 48 hours of travel to have 36 hours on the ground. So it's literally often a day and a half. You arrive one night, you ride the next day, you have dinner, and you're on like 6 a.m., shuttle call. Like you're hardly there enough to even get upside down with your jet lag. And so it is a lot of time in airports, airplanes, taxi cabs, shuttle buses, and there's nothing glamorous about that part of the job, And we almost always fly coach. There are rare exceptions where you fly, a Japanese manufacturer takes you to Japan. They often will fly you business class, or if you're flying a very long distance for certain press launches, but you're typically coached. So you're in a small, seat. It's not luxurious accommodations, and that's how you travel.
Yes. And, I've gone through TSA and like I'm going to Spain. How long are you going to be there? 2 days. And they're like, what? Because it makes no sense. Why are you flying to Spain for 2 days? I'm like, well, it's what I usually do. But it's, yeah. I mean, like you said, you're usually flying coach. And sometimes it's business class, or sometimes, now it's that comfort coach, which is way worth the money. Well, if you have that kind of money, I don't. But I flew coach once, and well, first of all, I was in LA, and it was Delta, so I had to fly to Atlanta in order to fly to Spain, and I'm like, I know what the world looks like. It's actually round. It's not flat. And that's Atlanta is not between LA and Spain, by any stretch, So the next flight from Atlanta to Spain, I'm sitting next to a woman with her 2-year-old child on her lap for 8 hours.
Oof.
And the plane was full, and I got no help from the flight attendants. And the plane landed in Madrid and then went on to Barcelona, and the woman got off in Madrid with her child, and I received a spontaneous standing ovation from all the people sitting around me.
For your tolerance.
Like, you're a saint.
So I mentioned earlier that, so my very first press launch, I also won't name names or manufacturers or anything, but when I was hired to be Writer's Road Test Editor back in 2008, I hadn't worked in the industry, so I didn't know anything about press launches. I wasn't a former racer. I was a number cruncher, and somehow talked my way into the job. I must have, sprinkled pixie dust in Mark Tuttle's eyes when he hired me. But one of my first press launches was one where Mark said, hey, you're going to a press launch. Here are the ground rules. Rule number 1, don't crash. Rule number 2, see rule number 1. And that's pretty much true for anybody that goes to press launches. And so I go to a press launch, and I don't know any of the people that are there. I know them by name because they wrote for other magazines that I had read and familiar with. And we're riding in the mountains, and the road is wet and it's foggy, and this is before a lot of traction control and things like that. And my skill level on new motorcycles, I don't want to damage this bike or anything. But there were guys on that press launch that every opportunity were doing a wheelie or a stoppie because they're always trying to impress one another. We were on a pretty famous road that a couple people got a speeding ticket, and that was the first day. The second day, we were on a similar route on some different motorcycles, and I broke rule number one. I crashed on my very first press launch, and fortunately, I did not get hurt, but I was riding with the staff, at the end of the back of the group with my head held low and my tail between my legs, feeling a great sense of shame. I thought that maybe I actually am going to get myself fired from this really cool job I just landed. And as it turned out, other members of the group ahead of me, there was somebody who may have been exceeding the speed limit, may have been passing on a double yellow. These are, this is what I've heard. I wasn't there when it happened. But a number of people where there was a roadblock involved. There were many other tickets involved, and one person was handcuffed and hauled off to jail. And so, and I was like, this is what a press launch is all about? I mean, I was picked up from the airport in an actual stretch limousine. That's the first and only time it's ever happened. I stayed in a luxurious, hotel, and there was, champagne in the refrigerator. And I thought, well, geez, this is going to be, can I live up to this sort of lifestyle? I'm not really that kind of guy. But anyway, it was a eye-opening experience. And fortunately, I didn't get hurt. Fortunately, I didn't get fired. I've made plenty of other mistakes. But yeah, press launches, sometimes things go wrong through accident. Sometimes things go bad because people behave badly.
Sometimes all of it, which makes for an excellent press launch.
Yeah.
A couple of things that you brought to mind for me is when you mentioned you crashed, I laughed, and rather than, oh, I hope you were all right, which is what normal people do. But road racers and moto journalists, that's the lifestyle, And if someone's not hurt, we laugh.
Well, like they say, some people say it's like, well, if you don't crash every now and then, you're not trying hard enough,
Yeah. And then I don't remember the other thing, but there was an intro that I went to. Oh yeah, I didn't crash until, this is what I was going to say. I didn't crash until maybe my third international intro. And it was on a racetrack in the rain. And this is also what people don't realize about the lifestyle is you're treated like a prima donna. You become a prima donna because who doesn't want to be a prima donna? It's great. But you show up in a foreign country at a racetrack and it's pouring rain. You put on your leathers and you get on the motorcycle and you go out on the bike. You don't go, oh, I'm going to get wet, or what, do you got rain tires? No, you go do it. And there were 6 of us Americans, 3 of us crashed. There were, I think, 8 journalists who crashed, throughout the day. And the rain never let up. We didn't have rain tires.
Yeah.
And I constantly made fun of because I crashed going in a straight line. It's because I lost the front while braking.
Right.
But it's and then you laugh. And they took me over to medical center. I had an abrasion here, and I couldn't straighten out my left arm for like 6 months. But other than that, I was fine. And as soon as I got out of the medical center at the track, I was back in the garages waiting for them to fix a bike. There was another racer there who had just crashed, so they were fixing 2 bikes. And got on a bike and went back out. Oh, yeah, and then they didn't call it a day until I was in a group of riders, and I see up at the next turn, this bike is doing cartwheels. And then they threw the red flag, and they're like, all right, we're done. We've had enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think they ran out of parts. I mean, the garage next to us, those guys, there was not a moment they were not repairing a bike. It was just amazing. So maybe there were more than 8 crashes. I don't know.
Well, I mean, you make a good point. Is that these press launches, and this is of course pre-pandemic. I haven't been overseas in over a year, and it's kind of nice to take a break. But is that these press launches are planned months in advance? They've had to sometimes reserve or rent a racetrack. They've got or a ride route on a scenic road on the coast of Spain or Portugal or Italy or wherever it is. And so these things are planned way far in advance. And if you happen to show up and there's bad weather, well, that doesn't do a lot for your photos, which is one of the key things that you need to bring back is photography and possibly video. But you're right. It's like, well, you can't come back tomorrow. You can't come back 2 days from now. You're in Spain
Right.
and you're flying home tomorrow. So today's your day. And maybe wave one had good weather and you got rain, but you get to ride in the rain and you get to make the most of it. And there may be caveats in your review. It's like, well, I couldn't really get on it because it was wet the whole time. But again, it's not a fair weather riding scenario. You're basically there on assignment, and you're not going to stay in your hotel room and be like, oh, well, you guys can go ride. I'm just going to stay in the hotel and read because it's raining. Like, you just can't do that.
No. And the thing is, riding a motorcycle on a racetrack in the rain on dot tires, you learn absolutely zero about that motorcycle.
Yeah.
Because you can't accelerate as it might, you can't brake as it might, you can't corner as nothing. It's just out of respect for the industry, and that's your job. You don't hesitate, you don't give it a second thought. You're just like, okay, and put your leathers on, and go do it. And except you're thinking, man, I wish I'd brought a rain suit.
That can be an issue. So I had a friend one time who we were doing a 5-bike sport touring comparison test, and that's a lot of bodies to get on motorcycles. And so the way that comparison tests work is you typically go out for a day or two. You take a photographer with you, and you've got to do all the photos of all. It can be 2 bikes, it could be 3 bikes. In this case, it was 5 bikes. So I needed a friend of mine to ride a motorcycle, and he came along. And what most people don't realize when they look at photos in a magazine, they think, oh, look, they just rode through that corner and they took a great photo. Is depending on the photographer. And in this case, I'll point out that Kevin Wing, who we work with most often, likes to really get the best possible light, the best, tack sharp images. And so there are many, many, many times that I have ridden through the exact same corner 45 times in a row, basically back and forth. And you're doing U-turn after U-turn on sometimes a narrow road, sometimes a gravel road. Sometimes there's sand in the corner. Sometimes the sun is in your eyes. Is that to get that shot, sometimes you've got to do this over and over and over and over again. And the friend that came along with me on the comparison test is like, hey man, I ride for fun. This is too much like work. Don't invite me back. So
that's funny. But yeah, you if there are 6 of you at an intro, that's a really small intro. There's often 10 or 12, and you are brought to a place where they're going to do photos, and you all line up, and like you say, you go past, and then you turn around and you wait for everyone to do their passes, and you don't want another motorcycle in your pass, so you got to wait like 20 seconds between each rider going, and then you do your U-turn. You're waiting for everyone to get back, and then you go back in the other direction, so you get a photo with the bike leaned the other way, or it was leaned from the inside, now it's from the outside, and then Fran Kuhn, who's a excellent photographer. I don't think he does for magazines anymore. I think he just works with manufacturers. He would always be up there. You do so many passes. You're hot because you've been just sitting there on a hot bike, and then he holds his hand up with 4 fingers. And so you're like, okay, just 4 more. So you do 3 more, and you come by again. And then he holds his hand up with 4 fingers, just 4 more. It's like, oh, geez. And what I've stressed to someone who's been new in the industry is that whenever the photographer's there, you're no longer a motorcycle journalist. You're a model. And whatever the photographer says, you do. I've been at intros with some neophyte, and he does one pass, He's done. He parks the bike and he takes his helmet off. No, I got my photo.
Nope.
And as you know, if we had come back to our editors, you know, with one photo or, you know, whatever, that would have been it. That would have been the end of our career, you know? And I was amazed. And I tried telling one guy once, I'm like, no, you really need to do more. But I was in an intro with a neophyte photographer, and we did one pass, and then everyone was done, and I came by again, and he was walking away. He's like, oh, what? There's a bike coming.
Yeah, you never get it in one pass. Almost never. That's the
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. It can go both ways. Like there's really at a press launch, you've obviously got to, balance that you've got a lot of people there and you've got a schedule to keep to and so forth. But I will stay late. I will do more passes anytime they say you want to do more. Is you never know what circumstances might change or shift. It can start raining. It can be cloudy. There can be a car passing by on a public road. Is that you need to get every opportunity to get as many photos as possible, because once you get back home, you really don't know what you're going to end up with until you actually see them. So, and I have been in situations, I'm sure you have too, where you just don't end up with enough photos to choose from. It really limits your options to do a layout for the magazine and tell your story. And, and really, I've often told people, it's like, the only reason I go to Spain is to get photos. I was like, because you can get a bike at home and test it and write your own story and so forth, but it's to be in a different environment. It's to have a different photographer. It's the only thing I have to bring home are good photos. If you don't bring home good photos, you can write your review, but then you don't have the visual component to support it.
And every manufacturer understands that and makes a wonderful orchestrated effort to make sure we get the photos done. But I have to say, there's one major manufacturer that I was on an intro with not too long ago, not way back not too long ago. I'll leave it at that. And I can't say where it is. There are a number of things that'll give away the brand, but it was a wonderful luxury vacation, and we had maybe 2 photo stops. And I asked the photographer later, I said, well, what about the other photographer? What's he got? And he goes, oh, no, he was a videographer. He wasn't taking pictures. I'm like, what? And then the afternoon of the second day of writing, we were all going to meet and they're going to do photos. They canceled it because, I don't know, we were having too much fun with the fun stuff. And I was just like, I'd never seen it happen before, where the manufacturer just sort of blew it away. Wow.
Yeah, the lifestyle stuff or the add-on experiences, those can be enjoyable if you've got time for them, but only if you've kind of gotten your homework done. Only if you've gotten the stuff that you need, because you know that you have an editor to go home to who is going to basically put you on the hot seat and like, hey, you didn't bring back what I needed you to bring back. So if you're getting paid as a freelancer, if you're on staff, it's like, it's not about you going there for a vacation. You can have fun, but you got to make sure you get the work done. It's like, you've got to be able to do both. So you have been in the industry for a long time. I know you have other interests. You do some work in philosophy. So you're very much a Renaissance man. You've got multiple motorcycles that you own in various places, and you're doing some restorations. What's keeping you occupied right now, Peter?
Well, surprisingly, the marketing for this book is taking a lot of time. There's a lot of things to do. And prior to that, surprisingly, my graphics guy laying the book out, I had to be way more involved than I thought I would be. So that's taken up a lot of time. What else am I doing now? I don't even know what the next project is. It's I don't know. I'm too wrapped up in this book. Well, here's the thing. On May 1st, I'm going to be in Atlanta doing a book signing at Pop's Coffee Company. And so I've had to get back to my art director. I got to get posters made. Before you called, I was wrapping up promotional items I have to bring because I made match books for the book. And I had this non-motorcyclist person I talked to that I was doing a book, stickers. And I mentioned he's a marketing person. I mentioned I got stickers, and he's like, stickers? Who the hell wants stickers? I'm like, you don't know motorcyclists.
Exactly. Everybody wants stickers. Yeah. I love that you have matchbooks, though. That's great. I still have a collection of matchbooks that I
Oh
used to
yeah,
get them from every
I'll send you
restaurant.
one. I'm sending you the book tomorrow.
Okay, great. Well, I
And
look forward to reading it. Yeah.
they well, maybe Monday, because they arrive, tomorrow before 8 p.m. or something. So
Gotcha.
it's weird. It's self-published, and nothing happened for 2 weeks. I was actually on the phone with them going yesterday, where's my books? And then in the afternoon, I got the note, oh, this ship, they're going to be there. Well, it was 2 days ago. They're going to be there Saturday. I'm like, wow, okay, that's pretty cool. And then I have to send them out to all the journalists to see if they'll mention the thing, which is why I can't even think what I'm doing next. But anyway, to go back for a second to the philosophy stuff, that whole thing about risk that I was chasing, which I actually wrote a whole book about it, and finished it, but I didn't get back to editing it, which I will one day. And that led me to, I quoted a philosopher in the book, Jean-Paul Sartre. And so I didn't know if I really understood and was quoting him right. So I found a philosopher who's a bit of a motorhead, and he had the blurb on the back of a book of philosophy. And so he's like, yeah, I'll read it over. So he read the chapter and he made notes, and I could see he just sort of drifted away as the thing went on. I'm like, yeah, he's like, this guy's so far off. I can't even, I don't want to waste my time. So, but then we started a conversation, and I realized all the mistakes I made. I reread the material, and then he said, well, okay, I understand what you're doing. And this is a really cool project. This is a great premise you're working with. How would you like to write an abstract and see about doing a presentation at a philosophy conference? And I'm like, wow, I was just so honored he asked. So I did. It was in Montreal at a university. Well, they're always at universities. It's a peer-reviewed conference in order to get in, and my paper was the first one, the first morning. So, which is probably good because I had no idea what went on. And I had a really good crowd. And they're just all sitting there smiling and nodding. And I'm like, are they drunk or what? And the paper was just hugely well received. I was shocked. And one of the philosophers said later, said, we like to invite people from outside the field, look at things from a different direction. And it usually falls apart. They don't really understand the material. And she said, but no, you nailed it. This is great. And then a year later, this professor got a hold of me, and he said, well, there's another conference coming up. You got another paper? And I go, yeah, I do. And that, again, I knocked them out. And one of the professors is like, no motorcycles, 2 papers. What are you doing? Who are you? What's going on? So I've done 8 papers, and one of them is published in a philosophy journal, the Sartre Studies International journal. So, which means I'm not just wasting space or there to humor, there for a laugh.
Well, having been in graduate school, having gone to academic conferences and published things in academic journals, those were more of a social science nature. But, that you have done writing for consumer enthusiast publications, that you've developed a voice, you've had columns, that probably informs your academic writing, to where there are academic writers who can write really well. Most of them cannot. They're very good at what they do, but communicating them can really get so clogged up with jargon and so forth that if you're able to write like, hey, I want my paper to be an enjoyable thing to read as well as be accurate in terms of the arguments I'm making or whatever. So I'm sure that there are people at those conferences that really appreciate having a fresh voice, rather than you can get there is an academic approach to things, just like there's a motorcycle magazine approach to things. And so I'm sure that's a fresh voice for a lot of those folks. So good for you.
Well, I get to break the rules, as what you're saying, hints to.
You're not trying to get tenure, so.
Right. And everybody else gets something. They get tenure, they get a job, they fulfill their graduating, requirements, their degree requirements. I get nothing. I'm just wasting people's time and space. and then to be published. Someone needs to be published, and I took that spot. I feel slightly guilty.
So I'm sure you're familiar with it. I have only looked at a couple of articles in there, but there is an International Journal of Motorcycle Studies. Are you familiar with it?
Yeah, I found it years ago, but I never really pursued it.
Yeah, well, I mean, not necessarily to contribute to, but it's something I've wanted to go look at and see what is it that the editor of that publication, what is it they're approaching? Is it mostly philosophical? One of the pieces I did read was philosophical, but I'm curious, like, what is the academic studies that would intersect with the motorcycle industry? So, like I said, I have that academic background. It, something that I pretty much walked away from. It just wasn't really my cup of tea. But yeah, there are people out there that are writing scholarly journals that have to do with motorcycles, and so and not just from an engineering standpoint. So that's something that, like I said, whenever I find the time, the extra time, I figured I would go look up online to figure out what kind of articles get published in that journal of
Yeah, we
motorcycle
should
studies.
both go back and take a look at that.
Yeah, yeah.
And also what you said, I've been chasing the argument about free will, whether or not we have free will. And one of the professors, he's been on one of the, president, vice president, in one of the officers in the organization also. He's pushing me to do the book because he said, you write for a mainstream audience. You know how to do that. That's not what we do.
Right.
So you do need to write this book. So that is one of my future projects that I couldn't remember a couple of minutes ago. But my more immediate future project is to finish a graphic novel that I've got like the last scene to do, and that's it. And I'm really thrilled about that.
You're not doing the illustrations, you're doing just
No, I'm not doing the illustration. Hopefully the woman who illustrated the cover of my book will do it.
which is very cool illustration. I've seen her Instagram channel. It's NATA_Duke, Natasha Duke, but it's not a Duke.
Yeah, not a underscore Duke.
Yeah.
NATA_Duke. Yeah, it's wild stuff. And it's evolved over the, 2 years plus since I've had her do this cover. And
is it a motorcycle graphic novel, or is it on a totally different subject?
No, there's not a motorcycle in it. And it's in the writing of it, I was trying to write about too much. And so I realized I've got 3 books here, not one. Yeah. So then I had to stop and take all my notes and put them into 3 different files for what each book would be. And then start over. And actually, I was in the writing of the thing, I was working on what is the 3rd book. And the reason I realized I had to stop is because the 3rd book, the ending is terminal. I knew it had to be terminal. And I'm like, well, that can't be the 1st book.
Yeah.
So I'm like, what is? So, yeah. And it's really brought together all different projects I've been working on my whole life, because, my degree is in fine art and my minor is in philosophy. And so I've always been chasing the meaning of symbols and metaphors and the confusion, that people have with what is real and what is metaphorical, like the Underground Railroad, that when I'm working in a history museum, every time I, like, with some city official or county legislator in the basement of some old house in the city, someone would say, "Oh, I wonder if the Underground Railroad ran through here." Like, it's not
it's not a subway.
It's not subterranean.
Yes.
And there was no train.
Yeah, I know.
It really, metaphors confuse people, and our lives are full of them. And even, Bertrand Russell, excuse me, trying to find the perfect math. And it almost drove him crazy, because there's no such thing. You will always run into conflicts and paradoxes and problems that won't work. Like when a set is self-referential, you get problems, all sorts of stuff. And it took him forever to realize math is not a thing. Math is a metaphor. And so it's not real. forget it.
Well, you are very much a Renaissance man with you're a man of motorcycle arts and letters. I just have to say, as the editor in chief of Rider for a few months, it's been a learning experience, but it's been a real pleasure to have your column, the Moto Life, as part of Rider Magazine now. You and Eric Tro both are our monthly columnists, and I really appreciate that. You've been very generous with your time. We've been on this interview for about an hour. You've been great talking about your book and your background. I appreciate all that. Anything else you want to share with folks before we wrap things up?
I wasn't there. I didn't understand the question. It's dark out.
Yeah, exactly. Well, like I said, in the show notes, we'll have a link to your Bad Editor website to where people can buy the book and so forth. And I hope you get it's well. Like I said, I look forward to reading it. I'm sure it will, be an enjoyable read. I hope it's well received at these book signings and your efforts to promote it. So I know you mentioned it in your column in our May issue, which we just finished up and will be coming out soon. So.
Thank you. And yeah, it's just thebadeditor.com. Can't be easier. Yeah. And I'm sponsoring a mini road racer, and Moto America has a mini road racing series that'll be at 4 events. And so I'm sponsoring the kid, and I might sponsor an actual adult road racer too. I just haven't been able to connect with one yet. But it's fun, and I love having a column in the magazine, and it's great. This is all fun.
Great. Well, thanks again, Peter. And for the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, I'm Greg Jevinstead. Thanks for listening, and keep the rubber side down.